So we'll start with, imagine a world, you're developing some app, people use it. It's obviously some great app. It's gonna be the next big thing. It's gonna be better than Instagram. Then somewhere in your app you have some UI like this where people can, select some items. It's gonna do something based on what they select. So typically you would implement it somehow like that. This is like the shortest snippet for that. So you'd have your view model, obviously, and you would have some selected items, mutable live data, and when upon clicking on the UI, you would put something into that collection. Your fragment would observe it. You would use data binding, no binding, view binding, jetpack combos, whatever you want. And okay, that's great. So people use your application, they select the part, and in the middle of their flow, in the middle of you even use it, you test it, and in the middle of flow, suddenly your mother calls, and she's like, "Oh, my internet's broke, my router doesn't work, and I don't know what to do. Could you guide me through?" And so you're like, "Okay, again." So you start to explain how she restarts it, how she would, what she needs to do. It takes minutes, it takes even hours. You even forget to, use the app, you put it in the background and you keep it there. And from Android system, something like this happens. Android actually will come and will kill the application in the background. And by the time after like next day or after some time, you decide, okay, you want to continue in the flow, but you lose your selected items, and you and your users will tell you that your app is complete waste of time and there's no point of using it. So you're like, okay, you're a good developer, you know that reviews are bad, so you try to fix it. So let's fix it. Okay, so in your fragment, this would be the fragment you'd use. You would actually get your, that's what you usually do. You get your view model, this is actually the plain usage without any DI. So you have Android view model factory, you put the things it needs, and then you get the view model with call by view model. This is, by the way, a new way of getting view models. You can imagine there's the view model provider of this get blah blah blah. This is actually in Android X library, newer version. So that's just how you get view model, but you want to fix it. Okay, so you know that fragments and activities, they have the state. So you'll be like, okay, and I can save it in the selected items, I can save it to the instance state, and then later on create of the fragment, I would retrieve it and set it to the view model. That would work, but there's the problem. You would be actually selecting the items after the view model's construction, which means if it was something you would need to do asynchronously, or you need to first load the items and then select them, you cannot do that in it, because you have to from fragment put the state into your view model. And even like that's what we don't want to do, because we know that view models are good with rotation of Android screen, which typically we don't do anymore because we lock it, but never mind. Okay, let's pretend we were good developers. We don't lock the screen. So typically you would just have some like variable, is it already loaded? You would be setting it, but then it's complexity, more complexity. And that sucks. You could fix that with custom view model factory for every view model you have, but let's pretend this option doesn't exist because we want to use DI, we want to use Dagger, and we want to have a great code. So actually, that's the save state module library from Android X. It can help us. How does it work? How could it look like, or what it should do? So whenever your fragment is created, it should actually like get the instance state, somehow pass it to the view model, which we need to have in a constructor so that we can have just the load just one time, and then whenever the system would decide to kill your app, it would just call it in unsafe instance state, and it would save the state. This is exactly what it does. So it has like two parts, two things, two worlds. From the fragment side, it has something called saved state registry, which is lifecycle aware component. That means that you don't have to care about it being destroyed, not destroyed. It will automatically hook into your fragment. And for when the time is right, it will either save the state or retrieve it from onCreate. On the other hand, from the view model side, we know that we cannot connect view models with fragments like tightly, at least not the one way. So in view model, it has something called save state handle, which you can put into your constructor. And this is actually the place which hooks into the registry, and it automatically connects with the things you want to save into instance state and the things you want to retrieve. So that sounds good. In theory, let's look how it would look like. Okay, so this is our previous fragment. We had that. So we'll just get rid of all the unnecessary code, which is all of this. And now what we need to do, we actually need to change the factory we retrieve the view model with. We'll change it to save state view model factory, which is again provided by the Android X library, save state module library. We pass the necessary parameters, which is application, and then this, which is something called save state registry owner, which is either fragment or activity. All right, that's it from the fragment side. And in the view model, as I was saying, we want to have it in constructor, so we put the handle, as I was talking about, into constructor. And then the selected items, we changed it to save state handle, get live data. We put the key, some default value, and that's actually it. Whenever you set something to that live data, it's gonna save into the instance state automatically, which means you put the app into background, system kills it, you return it back after some time, you'll have your data saved into the handle. Yeah. They're actually like get and set methods, so you don't have to use live data, but this is like a simple way. So that's nice. Now our users will put our many valuable reviews, and we have 5 stars again. All right. Okay, so that was one part of connecting the dots. We connected fragment to a view model with save state handle, new library. But we're good developers. We want to use DI, right? And I at least want to use Dagger. So let's recap how to connect view model with Dagger. To do that, for those of you who don't know Dagger, or maybe even for those who use it and think they know it, Dagger actually works with Java standard, Java norm, which is JSR 330. Nobody cares about it, but it's like 10 years old, and it's like standard for all or most of Java dependency injection frameworks. Spring works upon that. What was the other? Juice worked on that. Dagger 1 worked with that. Even Dagger 2 works with it. And that standard, that library, JSR, actually has just one interface and couple of annotations, and that's it. And that interface, you guessed it, it's provider. Obviously, it's not in Kotlin, but Kotlin's great. Do you use Kotlin, by the way? I hope you do. All of the samples going to be in Kotlin. For those who don't, please start. So the standard has just one interface provider of generic type T and one method get. And that's it just tells you, okay, whenever I want something, that T parameter, I have a function to get it somehow. It doesn't matter how, it's actually like implementation detail how to get it. But Dagger works like that's the biggest thing in Dagger, and I actually needed you to tell that there's some provider because we'll work with it. Okay. How does it work? So in Dagger, you have my class, your class. You annotate it with inject annotation. And what Dagger does, Dagger is basically mostly annotation processor with a couple of magic behind the scenes. It will find the class annotated with inject, and it will generate something like my class, your class factory, which implements provider of your class. And obviously it overrides the method get, as I was saying. And since we don't have any scope or anything, it's gonna just return new instance. So now when you have some dependency and you add it to your class, it will just generate more code into that factory. It will generate, again, provider of that dependency, not that dependency, not that dependency. And in the get method, it will just call the get on that dependency. Now, we need to, so that's the whole Dagger recap, except one more feature, which is called multi-binds. How many of you use multi-binds? 4. Okay, I think like the rest of it just doesn't know. Multi-binds is a feature which allows you to bind something into a collection. It's either map or set, and then you can retrieve it during compilation time. So I'll show you how does it like briefly look. So when you use multi-binds, you have some like map of, in our case, it's going to be class of viewModel and provider of viewModel, and then you use binds into map, some viewModel key, and you put the viewModel class into the set. So that's what happens. Maybe the rest who don't use it actually now recognize that they do use it. So you have like in this case, it will generate my viewModel to provider of viewModel, and some viewModel and its provider again. So this way, typically, Dagger really is not good about like dynamic things. It just generates things. So we have a structure like that, and that structure we can actually inject later wherever we want. So let's get into how to connect view models with Dagger. So we have to have for Dagger for view models, we know that we have to have factories creating view models, right? So we implement one interface, which is viewModel provider factory. It actually is factory for all the factories use to get viewModel. And then we actually inject that structure I was talking about. And we implement that method which factory needs, which is create. It'll give us class, like what class does it want to create. And we'll be like, okay, let's just retrieve it from that structure and call the get parameter. The get is the provider, as I was saying. And if we have no scope or anything, it's going to be like, okay, let's instantiate the class of the view model. And that's it. So in fragment, you would then inject the factory into your fragment, and again, you would be just like you would use it to retrieve your view model with. That's probably all of you who use Dagger. You have it. Maybe you're thinking like inject in fragments, like what? It's actually possible because of since fragment Android X fragment library 110. You can set fragment factory to manager, and even your fragments can participate in Dagger creation. You don't have to have no args constructors anymore. It works very similarly as with view models. It works really great with Android X navigation if you use it, because it navigation instantiates fragment instead of view manually. So that was just a side note. Okay, so we have two pieces now. We have view model with save state handle, and we have view model with Dagger, but we want it all together or nothing. So do you remember the parameter this? It was actually a couple of slides before when we used the save state view model factory. That this parameter is the save state registry owner. Google is really bad at naming, it's really long. So it's actually problematic because that's dynamic parameter, and as I was like saying, Dagger's really bad with handling dynamic parameters, because even the view models map, it's the only dynamic thing is the retrieving it from the structure, but that map is actually generated. So what Dagger does, it generates everything, but it really hates being it doesn't understand dynamic things. And so you'd be like, okay, how, if you tried, maybe some of you tried to put something dynamically, that's the problem, because the get method, it doesn't have any parameter, and you have just structure, so there's like no way, yeah, that this is like something it would create, so there's no place where you could actually put that dynamic parameter into. Some of you maybe would be like, okay, I could somehow magically, I could get it from fragment, right? You get it from fragment to the factory you create view models with. Maybe some of you even tried. You'd have like something like this. You would bind something from fragment to the safe state registry owner, or even try to provide it. But if you tried, even if this worked, if you try to have it with the injecting constructor, then you get into circular dependency issue, because your injecting view model factory would need something from fragment, and that fragment actually needs something from the factory, so you could stay there infinitely, and Dagger thankfully stops it. So because of that reason, we need to go deeper. We need to have creating factories, creating view models. I know that's complicating, but that's what we need. That's the only way how we could achieve that. And we don't want to create these factories manually, because then it's like a lot of boilerplate. So thankfully, there's a small library called Assisted Inject, invented and created by guess who? And what this library does, it's again annotation processor. I know we don't like annotation processors, right? Because they're slow, but anyway. It generates Dagger code. It generates code Dagger understands. So it can use actually again for generating some other code. So with Assisted Inject, you can create factories with dynamic parameters, and actually participate in Dagger graph. There's actually a great talk about this thing. It's called Helping Dagger Help You. Maybe you know it. It's from DroidCon London 2018. All right, how do we use it? So that's like something we'd have in our previous cases. We'd have some view model, which we inject some stuff into. So if with Assisted Inject, what we need to do is we change that inject to assisted inject, and the parameters, the dynamic parameters we want to use, we mark with assisted. So in our case, that's the safe state handle I was talking before about. And then inside that view model, we need to create a factory. We mark it with assisted inject factory. That factory needs to have one method. It doesn't matter about the naming. It has to have one method with all the dynamic parameters it needs, returning that types it instantiates. So in our case, since we want the handle to be somehow retrieved dynamically, we need to create that method in the factory. Since even that one line is boilerplate, we'll create base interface, which all the view model interfaces will inherit from. And now we can save even one more line. That view model assisted factory, it's just our factory. We actually need it as well for the structure I was talking about before for the view models. It's just the same but abstracted. And so now when we have, this was actually the factory we used before. So instead of the provider of view model, we now have to have the factory of view model. That's actually the reason we need to have it as a base class, as a base interface. And since it's not gonna be factory creating view models, it's gonna be factory creating factories view models. So we removed the interface. This is the outside layer factory, and what we need now, we have manual methods create, which is gonna be our factory creating the view models. So that's the inception we have, and to that create the create function has parameter owner, which is, if you remember, that was the this from fragment, so that will use it in fragment. And abstract state view model blah blah blah, that's actually a common parent to all the safe state factories Android X provides for the safe state module. We implement that, And so it will give us some parameters we can use, something not really important. But then it provides us the model class, which is the class of view model we want to instantiate, and the handle, which is something we want to put into the view models constructor. And now the rest is just, okay, let's again take that from the structure, from the map, take by the class, the view models, not provider now, but the factory, and call the create method the only method on the interface we had. Put the handle, retype st because that's what it needs. In the fragment, the only thing we need to change is instead of the factory, we need to now manually call the create and put this, which is the dynamic parameter in fragment. That's the save state registry owner. And by doing this, somehow, not somehow, I just told you how, magically it works, and yeah, that's it. Conclusion, we can connect the dots with small hack of assisted inject. No, seriously, we could do. I was saying in the beginning that we can do that manually with creating the factories, but that would be like so much boilerplate. Maybe some of you do that, but there's no need for that. You can just use the small library. You can save the boilerplate. What you can actually do is to put the factory into your base fragment, and then you don't have to even set the factory in your each fragment. You would be just calling by view models, or your whatever way you get your view models from. You can have the factory in your base class. You could implement the injecting save state view model factory even with fallbacks to regular Dagger, or even to fallbacks to no DI at all. That could work as well. And you can save your insta state of your app, and your users will be happy. I actually wrote an article about it, so who didn't get it can find it on the internet. It's every module, even our STRV blog. And that's it. Thank you. Anyone has any question? Okay, I have a question for you. Who thinks you get it? Oh, that's quite a lot. All right. Okay. If no other questions, then thank you. Let's get drink and party.